maybe it's electric, maybe it's solar panels, maybe it's material science, maybe it's computer systems, networking gear. Those are kind of deep tech areas, and I think that one of the misunderstood or lack understood, without people aren't recognizing the miracle, is that the computer science of China is world class. The software capability in China is world class, and in the future, everything will have software. 你的空调有 software, right? 你的 rice cooker has software, microwave has software, the fan has software, right? What's that?
Maybe the jacket has software.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would have automatically cooled me down just now. And so your watch has software, your glasses will have software, everything will have software in the future, and every company in the future will have, of course. If you're a hardware company, your hardware will have software in this cloud. Xiaomi and many of the companies here in China, Alibaba and Tencent and Meituan, uniquely in the world, has both hardware excellence and software excellence in the cloud. Very, very rare. I think more people need to celebrate that. Just because the applications like ByteDance is consumer oriented, the technology behind is incredibly advanced.
How does Nvidia balance your ambition in China amid the ongoing global uncertainties, geopolitical and regulatory?
There is no balance per se, and there's not much to think about really. The first thing that we have to do is recognize that every country has their national security policies and trade policies, and these belong to the countries. It's their right to have it, and our job is to comply to it. Our job is comply, and if for whatever reason we believe that our information can be more useful to them, it is my job to inform them of how our industry works and how the technology works, and so we can educate, we can inform. But whatever the policy is in the final analysis, we comply with it. The second thing we do is to build the best possible technology we can, make a contribution to the market, hope that the customers see benefit and value in the work that we do, continue to honor the partners and customers that you have, keep them as friends for as long as I have, for example, and after that, life is out of your control.
We know the development of AI has three key factors, like the algorithm and the computing power and also the data. But nowadays, I'm not sure, do you think people just focus more on the computing power? And without it, maybe there is no way to develop the AI?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good question. In fact, maybe you didn't understand pick up the background of her question. It's very, 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 very profound. In the first generation of AI, the technology, wave 1 was perception, and wave 2 was generative AI. Now we are in reasoning AI. Reasoning is like thinking. You're reasoning. Maybe you encounter a problem or a situation you have never encountered before, and you've never read about it before, never saw it before. And so now you have to break it down, reason about this situation. Is it safe? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? You have to reason about it. What should I do? Should I do something? Should I do nothing? Should I run away? So you should reason about it. So that reasoning capability is very powerful because it is foundational to intelligence. Now, and then the next wave we were just talking about is robotics. Okay? So the 4 waves of AI as we know it today. Now, in the beginning, for perception, most of the AI learned from data. You show many examples. Show words and stories and pictures and cats and dogs and so on and so forth. You show it many things, and the AI learns by memorizing and generalizing. Okay, and so now we've memorized and learned as much as we need to. A little bit like when we were young in school. Most of learning is going to class every day, and the teacher make you listen to lecture, and then you read and lecture and read, and it's just, it just keeps coming in. But since we graduated from school, most of the learning is not reading and lecture. Most of the learning is reasoning, is thinking. So now, this is the era of AI that learns by reasoning and thinking. And it's just compute. It's a computer just thinking by itself, practicing. It's like going home, doing math problem, many different ways, practicing. And by practicing and thinking and learning, imagining many scenarios, you are learning to be smarter. And so this is called post-training. The old way is called pre-training. This is called post-training. And post-training is tons of compute. Very little data, lots of compute.
Then Mr.
Yes,
Jensen,
yes, ma'am.
so why are you introducing RTX Pro right now in China, and what do you expect it will be in your China strategy, facing the competition between AMD and other Chinese companies chasing after?
Well, this week is the opening of the 3rd International China Supply Chain Expo. And the supply chain is robots, smart factories, and very complicated systems. And it's the perfect place to announce RTX Pro, which was designed for digital factories, digital twins, robots, and so on. It is a system for teaching robots how to be a robot, teaching a smart factory how to be a good smart factory. That's why this week was perfect.
Okay, many AI and semiconductor talents are Chinese or American Chinese. How do you view this phenomenon?
I'm sorry?
So Chinese or American Chinese AI talent or semiconductor talents, how do you view this phenomenon? Most of them are Chinese or American Chinese.
What is the phenomenon?
Like
leading
Americans are AI
ABC
AI leading researchers.
Yeah, maybe you asked the question in a way that is confusing to me, but let me tell you what I witnessed.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'm Chinese, and then I became an American Chinese, and I happen to be in semiconductors. No. It's a crane. He's working, doing his job, and I'm in AI. But we have many, as you know, there are many Chinese who are excellent in AI.
Yes.
There are also many Americans excellent in AI. There are many French. French is very good. The UK, Canada is excellent. Swiss, so on and so forth. So I think technology is really quite global. Now China has a very rich population because you have a culture of science and math. You already have computer science to build on. Computer science and software is very important for AI, and so it was a very good fit. And the technology happened, at this moment. And so China is really quite prepared for that. I think China will be very successful with AI.
Edison, yeah, we can see that in recent years, the domestic manufacturing in China has begun launching.
动得好快哦。
Right. Yeah, we can see that some domestic manufacturing in China have begun launching CUDA compatible alternative. So how do you see this trend? I mean, are you considering about like the open sourcing,
What are people doing?
I mean, some the domestic manufacturing companies, they have begun launching CUDA compatible alternatives. So alternatives.
Alternatives.
Yeah.
I understand your question now. My fault. Okay. Okay. Alternatives. CUDA is not closed. If you create a platform that is compatible with CUDA, it's fine. I'm okay. If you write an application and it supports another alternative, and that alternative is CUDA compatible, I'm quite fine with that. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. 没有关系.
Are you considering about open sourcing like 开源?
CUDA is open, right? You can see the documentation of CUDA and then if you create a compatible version to CUDA, 可以啊.
Okay.
Could you give us a sense?
So in a lot of ways, it's open already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not like x86. If you build something that's compatible with x86, they can get upset. But if you build something compatible with CUDA, I'm not upset. 没有关系。
Hi Jason, could you give us a sense of your conversation with Chinese leadership during your trip here in Beijing?
I had a wonderful meeting with Chairman Ren and Vice Premier He, and the conversations were around, of course, thanking me to come to China to celebrate and open the Expo. We spoke about China welcoming foreign companies to invest here and build businesses here, and that China is open and stable. And those who are open and stable were probably the most important messages that I received. And they want to know that Nvidia continues to invest here, that we are still doing our best to serve the market here, and we are. And so we spoke about many good things about Nvidia's doing business here.
I'd like to ask about HBM supply chain. So far, SK Hynix has been the largest supplier, but for the next generation product, for example, HBM 4, is there a possibility that the supplier will be more diversified, such as Samsung or Micron? Also, if there are any technical issues in the ongoing HBM4 qualification testing?
You know, every question I get from Korea is trying to make me choose between SK Hynix and Micron and Samsung. And you know, they're all great partners of mine. There are three excellent memories we use. We use HBM memory, we use GDDR memory, and we use LPDDR memory. These three memories, the memories NVIDIA use, are the most advanced in the world. And we have three great partners that work with us in this area. You know, NVIDIA has grown tremendously in the last 2-3 years. And AI is just at the beginning of our journey. AI is going to be a fundamental infrastructure for every country and every industry. And we have just started, as you know. We are only 2 years into the building of the AI infrastructure. So these infrastructure is really an AI factory. You apply electricity, and then tokens come out, smart tokens, right? Smart AI comes out. And so inside this factory is very unique. It has computers and memory. And so I think that the future opportunity for these three companies, for SK Hynix and Samsung and Micron, is very, very good. And we work with all three of them. Okay?
Do you think computing power is overrated? Without or lack of it, the company could not develop AI? And I believe you have heard what computing power and that. What's your opinion on that?
Computing power anxiety. Is that do you have anxiety when you have too much or too little?
Too little.
Too little. Oh yeah. I have computing anxiety if I don't have enough computers. You know, NVIDIA, we do a lot of none of our chips, our systems, our networking, our algorithms and software. None of it is possible without AI now. And so we have ourselves many AI supercomputers for our own engineers. And my engineers have computing anxiety. Every day they would love to have 10 times more. And that kind of tells you that this new era of computing is not about typing. It's not about hand coding. It's about the AI machine learning. And so if the AI machine is doing a lot of your learning, then you wish you have faster machines, larger machines, so you can tackle and solve problems that are bigger and faster. And so I think we're all going to have computing anxiety for a decade. Yeah, that won't go away. And we all have it. Anybody who's in engineering has it.
Your Blackwell chips use dysprosium capacitors. have you been affected by China's near halt since April 4 on exports of dysprosium and other rare earths? And as part of the Trump administration agreeing to allow you to export H20 chips to China, is there any arrangement either for Nvidia specifically or more broadly for China to ease its restrictions on these rare earth metal exports?
The first is no, because NVIDIA's use of these capacitors are, of course, some of the most complicated, most advanced capacitors in the world, but the volume we use is not that high in the grand scheme of things. I think the amount of overall inventory around the world is sufficient for us to enjoy. Your question, do you,
as part of the Trump administration allowing you to sell H20 chips to China, is there any broader arrangement for China to ease some of the export controls it has put on various strategic goods going to the United States?
Export control as a pillar of national security, and export control as a regime for a global exchange, I think is here. And I think I have no privileged information about the negotiations between the two countries, but what I read, as well as what other people have read, is that we were part of the exchange for the Nvidia chips. H20 was part of the exchange for rare earth and other things. And so I don't know any more detail than that, but that's what I read. But I think in the long term it does suggest that every country has its deep expertise in areas where it is extraordinary, and those extraordinary capabilities, of course, advances the economic prosperity and the economic security, which is foundational to national security of each one of those countries, each one of the countries. However, it's also important to realize that it's very likely that some of those things that countries are very extraordinary at would be part of exchange and conversations as it relates to trade in the future. And so I think that's probably some of the takeaways.
About the demand from the Chinese company after yesterday's the big announcement of the news about lifting H20, because the H20 and all other Nvidia chips are very, very popular in China, especially with biggest tech companies. You said that we all have the computing anxiety. So can you give some color about the demand after the yesterday's announcement?
After yesterday's announcement, I've spent all of my time with all of you. And so I've not met any of my customers yet. And so we should give them a chance to decide what they would like to purchase. And I'm looking forward to fulfill their requirements as fast as possible. It still takes us time to re-ramp up our supply chain. As you know, a supply chain today for NVIDIA is 9 months long. From the moment that I place a PO and start wafers all the way to a AI supercomputer ship is 9 months long. And so I'm going to work very hard to accelerate the recovery of hoppers and but anyhow, I think we're going to have to work very hard in the coming months.
You're very optimistic about the humanoid robots. How do you see the humanoid robots industry in China, and how will NVIDIA deepen these cooperations?
Several things. One, the world has a deep shortage of labor. People think that right now, well, they don't think. Right now, unemployment is quite low around the world, and there's a deep shortage of labor. If we had more people working in factories and manufacturing, the world's GDP would grow up a lot, because we're short not by a million, or we're short by tens of millions around the world. And so I think the whole world would be more prosperous if we had more automation. The second is the timing of humanoid robots and AI is happening right now, which is very exciting. We can see the technology happening. And then the third part of your question is, what about China? China is in a very special place because you have three things. One, you have excellent AI technology already, as I mentioned before. Second, you are extremely good at mechanical and electrical things. It's called mechatronics. China is very good at that. And then third thing, is you have a very large manufacturing base to hire those robots. And so these three conditions are very unique in China. So I'm very optimistic for robotics development here in China.
Yeah, how about cooperation with companies like Unitree?
We try to serve companies all over China that we are allowed to. You know, any company that we're allowed to serve, we try to do the best we can. And there are many smart young companies as well as established companies. Even, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Xiaomi has an amazing robot in the future, or BYD has an amazing robot in the future. So there's a lot of development here.
Do you have any
Justin, I'm Qing from Okay. Congratulations, H20 coming back China market.
Only in China can we do this out in the sun in the middle. First of all, you know, it's okay to get a tan, right? Yeah. It's okay to get a tan. Look, but can this side go to that side for a while?
Yeah. Yes, so we can.
Oh, would they like to be inside? Yeah. What are we doing out here? Why did somebody say so? 来到接进来。
把视频放成英文。
If you want to be a good supplier, a good company, you have to have excellent customers as well as excellent products. And so in China, we have very challenging and very dynamic and very innovative customers, and we want to be able to serve them. And so I will continue to do that. Thank you.
As well as China's Chinese customer use the new brand GPUs the Nvidia announced yesterday, and can you describe its performance?
Yeah. So H20 was released from its ban. H20 was released from its ban. H20 has some very, of course, it is not the highest performance of Nvidia's products today, but the memory bandwidth is still extremely good. It is still extremely good. So for inference and reasoning model inference, H20 is still going to be excellent. For large language models and vision language action models, there are many types of new models, Nvidia's architecture is going to be excellent. We introduced a new product called RTX Pro. And RTX Pro is designed for a new type of application. And this new application is called a digital twin. It is a virtual world, a digital robot. And the reason why digital robot is necessary is in order to teach a physical robot how to be a good robot and perform tasks, you do it in a digital world first. RTX Pro was designed for running a new application called Omniverse, Nvidia Omniverse, which is very important for digital factories, smart factories, robots, and so on and so forth. And so the RTX Pro product is very unique. It's the first of its kind in the world. And I think that here in China, because there's so much robotics innovation going on and so much smart factory work being done here, and the supply chain is so vast, RTX Pro is perfect. And so I'm very excited about that.
Mr. Huang,
Talk with Beijing.
first, okay.
Okay, ladies first.
So, okay, thank you. So, is there any new product or idea or company that make you surprised here in China, even something that even Silicon Valley has not emerged?
The electric vehicles in China are incredible. Would you guys all agree? I think I saw Beijing the other day, and he showed me his new car. The technology is incredible. The styling is beautiful. The quality of work is extraordinary. The technology inside is the best in the world. And I would love to. It's unfortunately not available in the United States, but that's our misfortune, not yours. The fact of the matter is the Xiaomi cars are great. The BYD cars are great. The Li Auto cars, they're so big. It's like a living room on wheels. And the Neo cars, XP cars, they're so luxurious, all of them. Yeah, Geely, so many. I think I'm very familiar.
Okay.
I would say that the electric vehicles in China are probably, in the last 5 years, the most surprising to the world in terms of the advancement. And I think on just purely technical, styling, objective basis, the cars are absolutely the best.
Did you considering to cooperation with Xiaomi in the automotive product?
Yeah, we work very closely with Xiaomi on many things. Xiaomi is a great partner. I met Xiaomi when Beijing was still quite young. I was younger, but he was very young. And I could tell from day one he was going to be incredibly successful. Beijing has, as you know, built a great company, genuinely a great company, a bit of a miracle of a company that can build everything from incredible smartphones to incredible cars and everything in between. And so they have air conditioners, they have incredible how one company can build such a great thing all underneath the Xiaomi platform. And so the thing that really highlights is something very special here. Most people think of China's deep tech usually in hardware. Maybe it's batteries, which is very exceptional. Maybe it's electric. Maybe it's solar panels. Maybe it's material science. Maybe it's computer systems, networking gear. Those are kind of deep tech areas. And I think that one of the misunderstood or not understood, without people aren't recognizing the miracle, is that the computer science of China is world-class. The software capability in China is world-class. And in the future, everything will have software. We're going to tell you software. Rice cooker has software. Microwave has software. The fan has software. Right? What's that? Maybe Tekkit. The Tekkit has software. Yeah. It would have automatically cooled me down just now. And so you watch a software, your glasses will have software. Everything will have software in the future. And every company in the future will have, of course, if you're a hardware company, your hardware will have software in this cloud. Xiaomi and many of the companies here in China, Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan, uniquely in the world has both hardware excellence and software excellence in the cloud. Very, very rare. I think more people need to celebrate that. Just because the applications like ByteDance is consumer-oriented, the technology behind is incredibly advanced.
Does Nvidia balance your ambition in China amid the ongoing global uncertainties, geopolitical and regulatory?
There is no balance per se, and there's not much to think about, really. The first thing that we have to do is recognize that every country has their national security policies and trade policies, and these belong to the countries. It's their right to have it, and our job is to comply to it. Our job is comply, and if for whatever reason we believe that our information could be more useful to them, it is my job to inform them of how our industry works and how the technology works. And so we can educate, we can inform. But whatever the policy is in the final analysis, we comply with it. The second thing we do is to build the best possible technology we can, make a contribution to the market, hope that the customers see benefit and value in the work that we do, continue to honor the partners and customers that we have, keep them as friends for as long as I have, for example. And after that, life is out of your control.
We know the development of AI has three key factors, like the algorithm and the computing power and also the data. And nowadays, I'm not sure you think people just focus more on the computing power. And without it, maybe there is no way to develop the AI.
Yeah, really good question. In fact, maybe you didn't understand pick up the background of her question. It's very, very profound. in the first generation of AI, the technology, wave one was perception, and wave two was generative AI. Now we are in reasoning AI. Reasoning is like thinking. You're reasoning. Maybe you encounter a problem or a situation you have never encountered before, and you've never read about it before, never saw it before. And so now you have to break it down. Reason about this situation. Is it safe? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? You have to reason about it. What should I do? Should I do something? Should I do nothing? Should I run away? So you should reason about it. So that reasoning capability is very powerful because it is foundational to intelligence. Now, and then the next wave we were just talking about is robotics. Okay? So the 4 waves of AI as we know it today. Now, in the beginning, for perception, most of the AI learned from data. You show many examples. Show words and stories and pictures and cats and dogs, and so on and so forth. You show it many things. And the AI learns by memorizing. Memorizing and generalizing. Okay? And so now, we've memorized and learned as much as we need to. A little bit like when we were young in school, most of learning is going to class every day, and the teacher make you, listen to lecture, and then you read and lecture and read, and it's just, it just keeps coming in. But since we graduated from school, most of the learning is not reading and lecture. Most of the learning is reasoning, is thinking. So now, this is the era of AI that learns by reasoning and thinking. And it's just compute. It's a computer just thinking by itself. Practicing is like going home doing math problem many different ways. Practicing. And by practicing and thinking and learning, imagining many scenarios, you are learning to be smarter. And so this is called post-training. The old way is called pre-training. This is called post-training. And post-training is tons of compute. Very little data, lots of compute.
Yes. So why are you introducing RTX Pro right now in China, and what do you expect it will be in your China strategy facing the competition between AMD and other Chinese companies chasing after?
Well, this week is the opening of the 3rd International China Supply Chain Expo. And the supply chain is robots, smart factories, and very complicated systems. And it's the perfect place to announce RTX Pro, which was designed for digital factories, digital twins, robots, and so on. So it is a system for teaching robots how to be a robot, teaching a smart factory how to be a good smart factory. That's why this week was perfect.
Okay, many AI and semiconductor talents are Chinese or American Chinese. How do you view this phenomenon?
I'm sorry?
So Chinese or American Chinese AI talent or semiconductor talents, how do you view this phenomenon? Most of them are Chinese or American Chinese.
What is the phenomenon?
Americans are
AI leading researchers.
Yeah, maybe you asked the question in a way that is confusing to me, but let me tell you what I witnessed. First of all, I'm Chinese, and then I became an American Chinese. And I happen to be in semiconductors. No. It's a crane. He's working, doing his job. And I'm in AI. And we have many, as you know, there are many Chinese who are excellent in AI. There are also many Americans excellent in AI. There are many French. French is very good. The UK, Canada is excellent. Swiss, so on and so forth. So I think technology is really quite global. Now, China has a very rich population because you have a culture of science and math. You already have computer science to build on. Computer science and software is very important for AI, and so it was a very good fit. And the technology happened, at this moment. And so China is really quite prepared for that. I think China will be very successful for that.
Yeah, we can see that in recent years, the domestic manufacturers China have been now launching. Great. Yeah, we can see that some domestic manufacturers in China have begun launching CUDA compatible automotive. So how do you see this trend? I mean, are you considering that like the open sourcing,
What are people doing?
some the domestic manufacturers companies they have begun launching CUDA compatible automotive. So
Alternatives.
Yeah.
I understand your question now. My fault. Okay. Okay. Alternatives. CUDA is not closed. If you create a platform that is compatible with CUDA, it's fine. I'm okay. If you write an application and it supports another alternative, and that alternative is CUDA compatible, I'm quite fine with that. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. No question.
Are you considering about open sourcing like high-end products?
CUDA is open, right? You can see the documentation of CUDA, and then if you create a compatible version to CUDA,
Okay. Could you
So in a lot of ways, it's open already.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not like x86. If you build something that's compatible with x86, they can get upset. But if you build something compatible with CUDA, I'm not upset. No question.
Could you give us a sense of your conversation with Chinese leadership during your trip here in Beijing?
I had a wonderful meeting with Chairman Ren and Vice Premier He, and the conversations were around, of course, thanking me to come to China to celebrate and open the Expo. We spoke about China welcoming foreign companies to invest here and build businesses here, and that China is open and stable. And those who are open and stable were probably the most important messages that I received. And they want to know that Nvidia continues to invest here, that we are still doing our best to serve the market here, and we are. And so we spoke about many good things about Nvidia's doing business here.
I'd like to ask you about HBM supply chain. So far, SK Hynix has been the largest supplier, but for the next generation products, for example, HBM 4, is there a possibility that the supplier will be more diversified, such as Samsung or Micron? Also, if there are any technical issues in the ongoing HBM qualification test?
Every question I get from Korea is trying to make me choose between SK Hynix and Micron and Samsung. And, they're all great partners of mine. There are three excellent memories we use. We use HBM memory, we use GDDR memory, and we use LPDDR memory. These three memories, the memories NVIDIA use, are the most advanced in the world. And we have three great partners that work with us in this area. NVIDIA has grown tremendously in the last 2-3 years. And AI is just at the beginning of our journey. AI is going to be a fundamental infrastructure for every country and every industry. And we have just started, as you know. We're only 2 years into the building of the AI infrastructure. So these infrastructure is really an AI factory. You apply electricity, and then tokens come out. Smart tokens, right? Smart AI comes out. And so inside this factory is very unique. It has computers and memory. And so I think that the future opportunity for these three companies, for SK Hynix and Samsung and Micron, is very, very good. And we work with all three of them. Okay?
Even computing power is overrated without or lack of it. the company could not develop AI. And I believe we have heard what computing power anxiety. What's your opinion on that?
Computing power anxiety. Is that, do you have anxiety when you have too much or too little? Too little. Oh yeah. I have computing anxiety if I don't have enough computers. You know, Nvidia, we do a lot of, none of our chips, our systems, our networking, our algorithms and software, none of it is possible without AI now. And so we have ourselves many AI supercomputers for our own engineers. And my engineers have computing anxiety. Every day they would love to have 10 times more. And that kind of tells you that this new era of computing is not about typing. It's not about hand coding. It's about the AI machine learning. And so if the AI machine is doing a lot of your learning, then you wish you have faster machines, larger machines, so you can tackle and solve problems that are bigger and faster. And so I think we're all going to have computing anxiety for a decade. Yeah, that won't go away. And we all have it. Anybody who's in engineering has it.
Blackwell chips use dysprosium capacitors. Have you been affected by China's near halt since April 4 on exports of dysprosium and other rare earths? And as part of the Trump administration agreeing to allow you to export H20 chips to China, is there any arrangement either for Nvidia specifically or more broadly for China to ease its restrictions on these rare earth metal exports?
The first is no, because NVIDIA's use of these capacitors are, of course, some of the most complicated, most advanced capacitors in the world, but the volume we use is not that high in the grand scheme of things. I think the amount of overall inventory around the world is sufficient for us to enjoy.
Your question, do you, as part of the Trump administration allowing you to sell H20 chips to China, is there any broader arrangement for China to ease some of the export controls it has put on those strategic goods going to the United States?
Export control as a pillar of national security, and export control as a regime for a global exchange, I think is here. And I think I have no privileged information about the negotiations between the two countries, but what I read, as well as what other people have read, is that we were part of the exchange for the Nvidia chips. H3 was part of the exchange for rare earth and other things. And so I don't know any more detail than that, but that's what I read. But I think in the long term, it does suggest that every country has its deep expertise in areas where it is extraordinary, and those extraordinary capabilities, of course, advances the economic prosperity and the economic security, which is foundational to national security of each one of those countries, each one of the countries. However, it's also important to realize that it's very likely that some of those things that countries are very extraordinary at will be part of exchange and conversations as it relates to trade in the future. And so I think that's probably some of the takeaways.
About the demand from the Chinese company after yesterday's big announcement of the news about lifting H20, because H20 and all other Nvidia chips are very, very popular in China, especially with biggest tech companies. You said that we all have computing anxiety. So can we get some color about the demand after yesterday's announcement?
After yesterday's announcement, I've spent all of my time with all of you. And so I've not met any of my customers yet. And so we should give them a chance to decide what they would like to purchase. And I'm looking forward to fulfill their requirements as fast as possible. It still takes us time to re-ramp up our supply chain. As you know, a supply chain today for NVIDIA is 9 months long. from the moment that I place a PO and start wafers all the way to a AI supercomputer ship is 9 months long. And so I'm going to work very hard to accelerate the recovery of hoppers. But anyhow, I think we're going to have to work very hard in the coming weeks.
You're very optimistic about the humanoid robots. How do you see the humanoid robots industry in China, and how will NVIDIA deepen these cooperations?
Several things. One, the world has a deep shortage of labor. People think that right now, well, they don't think. Right now, unemployment is quite low around the world, and there's a deep shortage of labor. If we had more people working in factories and manufacturing, the world's GDP would grow up a lot, because we're short not by a million, we're short by tens of millions around the world. And so I think the whole world would be more prosperous if we had more automation. The second is the timing of humanoid robots and AI is happening right now, which is very exciting. We can see the technology happening. And then the third part of your question is, what about China? China is in a very special place because you have three things. One, you have excellent AI technology already, as I mentioned before. Second, you are extremely good at mechanical and electrical things. It's called mechatronics. China is very good at that. And then the third thing is you have a very large manufacturing base to hire those robots. And so these three conditions are very unique in China. So I'm very optimistic for robotics development here in China.
Yeah, how about cooperation with companies like Unitree?
We try to serve companies all over China that we're allowed to. Any company that we're allowed to serve, we try to do the best we can. And there are many smart young companies as well as established companies. Even, I wouldn't be surprised if Xiaomi has an amazing robot in the future, or BYD has an amazing robot in the future. So there's a lot of development here.
Congratulations H20 coming back to China market.
Only in China can we do this out in the sun in the middle. First of all, it's okay to get a tan, right? It's okay to get a tan. But can this side go to that side for a while? Oh, would they like to be inside? If you want to be a good supplier, a good company, you have to have excellent customers as well as excellent products. And so in China, we have very challenging and very dynamic and very innovative customers, and we want to be able to serve them. And so I will continue to do that. Thank you.
Whether China's Chinese customer use the new brand to use the Nvidia announced yesterday, and can you describe its performance?
Yeah. So H20 was released from its ban. H20 has some very, of course, it is not the highest performance of NVIDIA's products today, but the memory bandwidth is still extremely good. It is still extremely good. So for inference and reasoning model inference, H20 is still going to be excellent. For large language models and vision language action models, there are many types of new models. NVIDIA's architecture is going to be excellent. We introduced a new product called RTX Pro. And RTX Pro is designed for a new type of application. And this new application is called a digital twin. It is a virtual world, a digital robot. And the reason why digital robot is necessary is in order to teach a physical robot how to be a good robot and perform tasks, you do it in a digital world first. RTX Pro was designed for running a new application called Omniverse, NVIDIA Omniverse, which is very important for digital factories, smart factories, robots, and so on and so forth. And so the RTX Pro product is very unique. It's the first of its kind in the world. And I think that here in China, because there's so much robotics innovation going on and so much smart factory work being done here, and the supply chain is so vast, RTX Pro is perfect. And so I'm very excited about that.
Mr. Huang, please.
Talk with Beijing.
Ladies first, okay?
Okay, ladies first.
So, okay, thank you. So, is there any new product or idea or company that make you surprised here in China, even something that even Silicon Valley has not emerged?
The electric vehicles in China are incredible. Would you guys all agree? I think I saw Beijing the other day, and he showed me his new car. The technology is incredible. The styling is beautiful. The quality of work is extraordinary. The technology inside is the best in the world. And I would love to. It's unfortunately not available in the United States, but that's our misfortune, not yours. The fact of the matter is, the Xiaomi cars are great. The BYD cars are great. The Li Auto cars, they're so big. It's like a living room on wheels. And the Neo cars, XP cars, they're so luxurious, all of them. Geely, and so many. I'm very creative. I would say that the electric vehicles in China are probably, in the last 5 years, the most surprising to the world in terms of their advancement. And I think on just purely technical, styling, objective basis, the cars are absolutely robust.
Is your neighbor considering to cooperation with Xiaomi in the automotive palette?
Yeah, we work very closely with Xiaomi on many things. Xiaomi is a great partner. I met Xiaomi when Beijing was still quite young. I was younger, but he was very young. And I could tell from day one he was going to be incredibly successful. Beijing has, as you know, built a great company, genuinely a great company, and a bit of a miracle of a company that can build everything from incredible smartphones to incredible cars and everything in between. And so they have air conditioners, they have incredible how one company can build such a great thing, all underneath the Xiaomi platform. And so the thing that really highlights is something very special here. Most people think of China's deep tech, usually in hardware. Maybe it's batteries, which is very exceptional. Maybe it's electric. Maybe it's solar panels. Maybe it's material science. Maybe it's computer systems, networking gear. Those are kind of deep tech areas. And I think that one of the misunderstood or not understood, without people aren't recognizing the miracle, is that the computer science of China is world class. The software capability in China is world-class. And in the future, everything will have software. The Intel has software. The rice cooker has software. Microwave has software. The fan has software. Right? What's that? Maybe the Tech has software. Yeah. It would have automatically cooled me down just now. And so you watch our software, your glasses will have software. Everything will have software in the future. And every company in the future will have, of course, if you're a hardware company, your hardware will have software in this cloud. Xiaomi and many of the companies here in China, Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan, uniquely in the world, has both hardware excellence and software excellence in the cloud. Very, very rare. I think more people need to celebrate that. Just because the applications like ByteDance is consumer-oriented, the technology behind is incredibly advanced.
Does Nvidia balance your ambition in China amid the ongoing global uncertainties, geopolitical and regulatory?
There is no balance per se, and there's not much to think about, really. The first thing that we have to do is recognize that every country has their national security policies and trade policies, and these belong to the countries. It's their right to have it, and our job is to comply to it. Our job is comply, and if for whatever reason we believe that our information could be more useful to them, it is my job to inform them of how our industry works and how the technology works. And so we can educate, we can inform. But whatever the policy is in the final analysis, we comply with it. The second thing we do is to build the best possible technology we can, make a contribution to the market, hope that the customers see benefit and value in the work that we do, continue to honor the partners and customers that we have, keep them as friends for as long as I have, for example. And after that, life is out of your control.
Even though the development of AI has three key factors, like the algorithm and the computing power and also the data. And nowadays, I'm not sure you think people just focus more on the computing power. And without it, maybe there is no way to develop the AI.
Yeah, really good question. In fact, maybe you didn't understand pick up the background of her question. It's very, very profound. In the first generation of AI, the technology, wave one was perception, and wave two was generative AI. Now we are in reasoning AI. Reasoning is like thinking. You're reasoning. Maybe you encounter a problem or a situation you have never encountered before, and you've never read about it before, never saw it before. And so now you have to break it down. Reason about this situation. Is it safe? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? You have to reason about it. What should I do? Should I do something? Should I do nothing? Should I run away? So you should reason about it. So that reasoning capability is very powerful because it is foundational to intelligence. Now, and then the next wave we were just talking about is robotics. Okay? So the 4 waves of AI as we know today. Now, in the beginning, for perception, most of the AI learned from data. You show many examples. Show words and stories and pictures and cats and dogs and so on and so forth. You show it many things. And the AI learns by memorizing and generalizing. Okay? And so now, we've memorized and learned as much as we need to. A little bit like when we were young in school, most of learning is going to class every day, and the teacher make you, listen to lecture, and then you read and lecture and read. It's just, it just keeps coming in. But since we graduated from school, most of the learning is not reading and lecture. Most of the learning is reasoning, is thinking. So now, this is the era of AI that learns by reasoning and thinking. And it's just compute. It's a computer just thinking by itself, practicing. It's like going home doing math problem, many different ways, practicing. And by practicing and thinking and learning, imagining many scenarios, you are learning to be smarter. And so this is called post-training. The old way is called pre-training. This is called post-training. And post-training is tons of computing. Very little data, lots of computing.
Yes. So why are you introducing RTX Pro right now in China, and what do you expect it will be in your China strategy facing the competition between AMD and all the Chinese companies chasing after?
Well, this week is the opening of the 3rd International China Supply Chain Expo. And the supply chain is robots, smart factories, and very complicated systems. And it's the perfect place to announce RTX Pro, which was designed for digital factories, digital twins, robots, and so on. So it is a system for teaching robots how to be a robot, teaching a smart factory how to be a good smart factory. That's why this week was perfect.
Okay, many AI and semiconductor talents are Chinese or American Chinese. How do you view this phenomenon?
I'm sorry?
So Chinese or American Chinese AI talent or semiconductor talents. How do you view this phenomenon? Most of them Chinese or American Chinese.
What is the phenomenon?
Americans are
AI leading researchers.
Yeah, maybe you asked the question in a way that is confusing to me, but let me tell you what I witnessed. First of all, I'm Chinese, and then I became an American Chinese, and I happen to be in semiconductors. No. It's a crane. He's working, doing his job, and I'm in AI. And we have many, as you know, there are many Chinese who are excellent in AI. There are also many Americans excellent in AI. There are many French. French is very good. The UK, Canada is excellent. Swiss, so on and so forth. So I think technology is really quite global. Now China has a very rich population because you have a culture of science and math. You already have computer science to build on. Computer science and software is very important for AI, and so it was a very good fit. And the technology happened, at this moment. And so China is really quite prepared for that. I think China will be very successful for that.
Yeah, we can see that in recent years with domestic manufacturers, China has been now launching. Right. Yeah, we can see that some domestic manufacturers in China have begun launching CUDA compatible automotive. So how do you see this trend? I mean, are you considering that like the open sourcing,
What are people doing?
some the domestic manufacturers companies they have begun launching CUDA compatible automotive. So
Alternatives.
Yeah.
I understand your question now. My fault. Okay. Okay. Alternatives. CUDA is not closed. If you create a platform that is compatible with CUDA, it's fine. I'm okay. If you write an application and it supports another alternative, and that alternative is CUDA compatible, I'm quite fine with that. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. No question.
Are you considering about open sourcing like high-end products?
CUDA is open, right? You can see the documentation of CUDA, and then if you create a compatible version to CUDA,
Okay. Could you give us a sense?
So in a lot of ways, it's open already.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not like x86. If you build something that's compatible with x86, they can get upset. But if you build something compatible with CUDA, I'm not upset. No question.
Could you give us a sense of your conversation with Chinese leadership during your trip here in Beijing?
I had a wonderful meeting with Chairman Ren and Vice Premier He, and the conversations were around, of course, thanking me to come to China to celebrate and open the Expo. We spoke about China welcoming foreign companies to invest here and build businesses here, and that China is open and stable. And those who are open and stable were probably the most important messages that I received. And they want to know that Nvidia continues to invest here, that we are still doing our best to serve the market here, and we are. And so we spoke about many good things about Nvidia's doing business here.
I'd like to ask you about HBM supply chain. So far, SK Hynix has been the largest supplier, but for the next generation products, for example, HBM 4, is there a possibility that the supplier will be more diversified, such as Samsung or Micron? Also, if there are any technical issues in the ongoing HBM 4 qualification test?
Every question I get from Korea is trying to make me choose between SK Hynix and Micron and Samsung. And, they're all great partners of mine. There are three excellent memories we use. We use HBM memory, we use GDDR memory, and we use LPDDR memory. These three memories, the memories NVIDIA use, are the most advanced in the world. And we have three great partners that work with us in this area. NVIDIA has grown tremendously in the last 2-3 years. And AI is just at the beginning of our journey. AI is going to be a fundamental infrastructure for every country and every industry. And we have just started, as you know. We are only 2 years into the building of the AI infrastructure. So these infrastructure is really an AI factory. You apply electricity, and then tokens come out. Smart tokens, right? Smart AI comes out. And so inside this factory is very unique. It has computers and memory. And so I think that the future opportunity for these three companies, for SK Hynix and Samsung and Micron, is very, very good. And we work with all three of them. Okay?
Even computing power is overrated. Without lack of it, the company could not develop AI. And I believe we have computing power and that. What's your opinion on that?
Computing power anxiety. Do you have anxiety when you have too much or too little? Too little. Oh yeah. I have computing anxiety if I don't have enough computers. NVIDIA, we do a lot of, none of our chips, our systems, our networking, our algorithms and software, none of it is possible without AI now. And so we have ourselves many AI supercomputers for our own engineers. And my engineers have computing anxiety. Every day they would love to have 10 times more. And that kind of tells you that this new era of computing is not about typing. It's not about hand coding. It's about the AI machine learning. And so if the AI machine is doing a lot of your learning, then you wish you have faster machines, larger machines, so you can tackle and solve problems that are bigger and faster. And so I think we're all going to have computing anxiety for a decade. Yeah, that won't go away. And we all have it. Anybody who's in engineering has it.
Your Blackwell chips use dysprosium capacitors. Have you been affected by China's near halt since April 4 on exports of dysprosium and other rare earths? And as part of the Trump administration agreeing to allow you to export H20 chips to China, is there any arrangement either for NVIDIA specifically or more broadly for China to ease its restrictions on these rare earth metal exports?
The first is no, because NVIDIA's use of these capacitors are, of course, some of the most complicated, most advanced capacitors in the world, but the volume we use is not that high in the grand scheme of things. I think the amount of overall inventory around the world is sufficient for us to enjoy.
Your question, do you, as part of the Trump administration allowing you to sell H20 chips to China, is there any broader arrangement for China to ease some of the export controls it has put on those strategic goods going to the United States?
Export control as a pillar of national security, and export control as a regime for a global exchange, I think is here. And I think I have no privileged information about the negotiations between the two countries, but what I read, as well as what other people have read, is that we were part of the exchange for the NVIDIA chips. H3 was part of the exchange for rare earth and other things. And so I don't know any more detail than that, but that's what I read. But I think in the long term, it does suggest that every country has its deep expertise in areas where it is extraordinary, and those extraordinary capabilities, of course, advances the economic prosperity and the economic security, which is foundational to national security of each one of those countries, each one of the countries. However, it's also important to realize that it's very likely that some of those things that countries are very extraordinary at will be part of exchange and conversations as it relates to trade in the future. And so I think that's probably some of the takeaways.
About the demand from the Chinese company after yesterday's big announcement of the news about lifting H20, because H20 and all other Nvidia chips are very popular in China, especially with biggest tech companies. You said that we all have computing anxiety. So can you give some color about the demand after the yesterday's announcement?
After yesterday's announcement, I've spent all of my time with all of you. And so I've not met any of my customers yet. And so we should give them a chance to decide what they would like to purchase. And I'm looking forward to fulfill their requirements as fast as possible. It still takes us time to re-ramp up our supply chain. As you know, a supply chain today for Nvidia is 9 months long. From the moment that I place a PO and start wafers all the way to a AI supercomputer chip is 9 months long. And so I'm going to work very hard to accelerate the recovery of Hoppers. But anyhow, I think we're going to have to work very hard in the coming months.
You're very optimistic about the humanoid robots.
Yeah.
How do you see the humanoid robots industry in China, and how will Nvidia deepen this cooperation?
Several things. One, the world has a deep shortage of labor. People think that right now, well, they don't think. Right now, unemployment is quite low around the world, and there's a deep shortage of labor. If we had more people working in factories and manufacturing, the world's GDP would grow up a lot, because we're short not by a million, we're short by tens of millions around the world. And so I think the whole world would be more prosperous if we had more automation. The second is the timing of humanoid robots and AI is happening right now, which is very exciting. We can see the technology happening. And then the third part of your question is, what about China? China is in a very special place because you have three things. One, you have excellent AI technology already, as I mentioned before. Second, you're extremely good at mechanical or electrical things. It's called mechatronics. China is very good at that. And then the third thing is you have a very large manufacturing base to hire those robots. And so these three conditions are very unique in China. So I'm very optimistic for robotics development here in China.
Yeah, how about cooperation with companies like Unitree?
We try to serve companies all over China that we're allowed to. Any company that we're allowed to serve, we try to do the best we can. And there are many smart young companies as well as established companies. Even, I wouldn't be surprised if Xiaomi has an amazing robot in the future, or BYD has an amazing robot in the future. So there's a lot of development here.
Do you have any
Congratulations, H20 coming back to China market.
Only in China can we do this out in the sun in the middle. First of all, it's okay to get a tan, right? It's okay to get a tan. Can this side go to that side for a while? Oh, would they like to be inside? If you want to be a good supplier, a good company, you have to have excellent customers as well as excellent products. And so in China, we have very challenging and very dynamic and very innovative customers, and we want to be able to serve them. And so I will continue to do that. Thank you.
Whether China's Chinese customer use the new brand GPUs use the Nvidia announced yesterday, and can you describe its performance?
Yeah. So H20 was released from its ban. H20 has some very Of course, it is not the highest performance of NVIDIA's products today, but the memory bandwidth is still extremely good. It is still extremely good. So for inference and reasoning model inference, H20 is still going to be excellent. For large language models and vision language action models, there are many types of new models. NVIDIA's architecture is going to be excellent. We introduced a new product called RTX Pro. And RTX Pro is designed for a new type of application. And this new application is called a digital twin. It is a virtual world, a digital robot. And the reason why digital robot is necessary is in order to teach a physical robot how to be a good robot and perform tasks, you do it in a digital world first. RTX Pro was designed for running a new application called Omniverse, NVIDIA Omniverse, which is very important for digital factories, smart factories, robots, and so on and so forth. And so the RTX Pro product is very unique. It's the first of its kind in the world. And I think that here in China, because there's so much robotics innovation going on and so much smart factory work being done here, and the supply chain is so vast, RTX Pro is perfect. And so I'm very excited about that.
Mr. Huang,
Talk with Beijing.
ladies first, okay?
Okay, ladies first.
So, okay, thank you. So, is there any new product or idea or company that make you surprised here in China, even something that even Silicon Valley has not emerged?
The electric vehicles in China are incredible. Would you guys all agree? I think I saw Beijing the other day, and he showed me his new car. The technology is incredible. The styling is beautiful. The quality of work is extraordinary. The technology inside is the best in the world. And I would love to. It's unfortunately not available in the United States, but that's our misfortune, not yours. The fact of the matter is the Xiaomi cars are great. The BYD cars are great. The Li Auto cars, they're so big. It's like a living room on wheels. And the Neo cars, XP cars, they're so luxurious, all of them. Geely, so many. I'm very creative. I would say that the electric vehicles in China are probably, in the last 5 years, the most surprising to the world in terms of their advancement. And I think on just purely technical, styling, objective basis, the cars are absolutely robust.
Did you make a concern related to cooperation with Xiaomi in the automotive product?
Yeah, we work very closely with Xiaomi on many things. Xiaomi is a great partner. I met Xiaomi when Beijing was still quite young. I was younger, but he was very young. And I could tell from day one he was going to be incredibly successful. Beijing has, as you know, built a great company, genuinely a great company, and a bit of a miracle of a company that can build everything from incredible smartphones to incredible cars and everything in between. And so they have air conditioners, they have incredible how one company can build such a great thing, all underneath the Xiaomi platform. And so the thing that really highlights is something very special here. Most people think of China's deep tech, usually in hardware. Maybe it's batteries, which is very exceptional. Maybe it's electric. Maybe it's solar panels. Maybe it's material science. Maybe it's computer systems, networking gear. Those are kind of deep tech areas. And I think that one of the misunderstood or not understood, without people aren't recognizing the miracle, is that the computer science of China is world-class. The software capability in China is world-class. And in the future, everything will have software. The Intel has software. The rice cooker has software. Microwave has software. The fan has software. Right? What's that? Maybe the Tech has software. Yeah. It would have automatically cooled me down just now. And so you watch our software, your glasses will have software, everything will have software in the future. And every company in the future will have, of course, if you're a hardware company, your hardware will have software in this cloud. Xiaomi and many of the companies here in China, Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan, uniquely in the world has both hardware excellence and software excellence in the cloud. Very, very rare. I think more people need to celebrate that. Just because the applications like ByteDance is consumer-oriented, the technology behind is incredibly advanced.
Does Nvidia balance your ambition in China amid the ongoing global uncertainties, geopolitical and regulatory?
There is no balance per se, and there's not much to think about, really. The first thing that we have to do is recognize that every country has their national security policies and trade policies, and these belong to the countries. It's their right to have it, and our job is to comply to it. Our job is comply, and if for whatever reason we believe that our information could be more useful to them, it is my job to inform them of how our industry works and how the technology works. And so we can educate, we can inform. But whatever the policy is in the final analysis, we comply with it. The second thing we do is to build the best possible technology we can, make a contribution to the market, hope that the customers see benefit and value in the work that we do, continue to honor the partners and customers that we have, keep them as friends for as long as I have, for example. And after that, life is out of your control.
When the development of AI has three key factors, like the algorithm and the computing power and also the data. And nowadays, I'm not sure if you think people just focus more on the computing power. And without it, maybe there is no way to develop the AI.
Yeah, really good question. In fact, maybe you didn't understand pick up the background of her question. It's very, very profound. In the first generation of AI, the technology, wave one was perception, and wave two was generative AI. Now we are in reasoning AI. Reasoning is like thinking. You're reasoning. Maybe you encounter a problem or a situation you have never encountered before, and you've never read about it before, never saw it before. And so now you have to break it down. Reason about this situation. Is it safe? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? You have to reason about it. What should I do? Should I do something? Should I do nothing? Should I run away? So you should reason about it. So that reasoning capability is very powerful because it is foundational to intelligence. Now, that's good. And then the next wave we were just talking about is robotics. Okay? So the four waves of AI as we know it today. Now, in the beginning, for perception, most of the AI learned from data. You show many examples. Show words and stories and pictures and cats and dogs and so on and so forth. You show it many things. And the AI learns by memorizing and generalizing. Okay? And so now we've memorized and learned as much as we need to. A little bit like when we were young in school, most of learning is going to class every day, and the teacher make you, listen to lecture, and then you read and lecture and read. It's just, it just keeps coming in. But since we graduated from school, most of the learning is not reading and lecture. Most of the learning is reasoning, is thinking. So now, this is the era of AI that learns by reasoning and thinking. And it's just compute. It's a computer just thinking by itself, practicing. It's like going home, doing math problem, many different ways, practicing. And by practicing and thinking and learning, imagining many scenarios, you are learning to be smarter. And so this is called post-training. The old way is called pre-training. This is called post-training. And post-training is tons of compute. Very little data, lots of compute.
So why are you introducing RTX Pro right now in China, and what do you expect it will be in your China strategy facing the competition between AMD and other Chinese companies chasing after?
Well, this week is the opening of the 3rd International China Supply Chain Expo. And the supply chain is robots, smart factories, and very complicated systems. And it's the perfect place to announce RTX Pro, which was designed for digital factories, digital twins, robots, and so on. So it is a system for teaching robots how to be a robot, teaching a smart factory how to be a good smart factory. That's why this week was perfect.
Okay, many AI and semiconductor talents are Chinese or American Chinese. How do you view this phenomenon?
I'm sorry?
So Chinese or American Chinese AI talent or semiconductor talents, how do you view this phenomenon? Most of them are Chinese or American Chinese.
What is the phenomenon?
AI leading researchers.
Yeah, maybe you asked the question in a way that is confusing to me, but let me tell you what I witnessed. First of all, I'm Chinese, and then I became an American Chinese. And I happen to be in semiconductors. No. It's a crane. He's working, doing his job. And I'm in AI. And we have many, as you know, there are many Chinese who are excellent in AI. There are also many Americans excellent in AI. There are many French. French is very good. The UK, Canada is excellent. Swiss, so on and so forth. So I think technology is really quite global. Now, China has a very rich population because you have a culture of science and math. You already have computer science to build on. Computer science and software is very important for AI, and so it was a very good fit. And the technology happened, at this moment. And so China is really quite prepared for that. I think China will be very successful for that.
Yeah, we can see that in recent years for domestic manufacturers, China has been now launching. Great. Yeah, we can see that some domestic manufacturers in China have begun launching CUDA compatible automotive. So how do you see this trend? I mean, are you considering that like the open sourcing,
What are people doing?
some the domestic manufacturers companies they have begun launching CUDA compatible automotive. So
Alternatives.
Yeah.
I understand your question now. My fault. Okay. Okay. Alternatives. CUDA is not closed. If you create a platform that is compatible with CUDA, it's fine. I'm okay. If you write an application and it supports another alternative, and that alternative is CUDA compatible, I'm quite fine with that. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. No question.
are you considering about open sourcing like high-end product?
CUDA is open, right? You can see the documentation of CUDA, and then if you create a compatible version to CUDA,
Okay. Could you give us a sense?
So in a lot of ways, it's open already.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not like x86. If you build something that's compatible with x86, they can get upset. But if you build something compatible with CUDA, I'm not upset. No question.
Could you give us a sense of the conversation with Chinese leadership during your trip here in Beijing?
I had a wonderful meeting with Chairman Ren and Vice Premier He, And the conversations were around, of course, thanking me to come to China to celebrate and open the Expo. We spoke about China welcoming foreign companies to invest here and build businesses here, and that China is open and stable. And those who are open and stable were probably the most important messages that I received. And they want to know that Nvidia continues to invest here, that we are still doing our best to serve the market here, and we are. And so we spoke about many good things about Nvidia's doing business here.
We like to ask about HBM supply chain. So far, SK Hynix has been the largest supplier, but for the next generation products, for example, HBM 4, is there a possibility that the supplier will be more diversified, such as Samsung or Micron? Also, if there are any technical issues in the ongoing HBM 4 qualification test?
You know, every question I get from Korea is trying to make me choose between SK Hynix and Micron and Samsung. And, you know, they're all great partners of mine. There are three excellent memories we use. We use HBM memory, we use GDDR memory, and we use LPDDR memory. These three memories, the memories NVIDIA use, are the most advanced in the world. And we have three great partners that work with us in this area. You know, NVIDIA has grown tremendously in the last 2-3 years. And AI is just at the beginning of our journey. AI is going to be a fundamental infrastructure for every country and every industry. And we have just started, as you know. We are only 2 years into the building of the AI infrastructure. So these infrastructure is really an AI factory. You apply electricity, and then tokens come out. Smart tokens, right? Smart AI comes out. And so inside this factory is very unique. It has computers and memory. And so I think that the future opportunity for these three companies, for SK Hynix and Samsung and Micron, is very, very good. And we work with all three of them. Okay?
Even computing power is overrated. Without or lack of it, the company could not develop AI. And I believe we have what computing power and that. What's your opinion on that?
Computing power anxiety. Do you have anxiety when you have too much or too little? Too little. Oh yeah. I have computing anxiety if I don't have enough computers. You know, NVIDIA, we do a lot of, none of our chips, our systems, our networking, our algorithms and software, none of it is possible without AI now. And so we have ourselves many AI supercomputers for our own engineers. And my engineers have computing anxiety. Every day they would love to have 10 times more. And that kind of tells you that this new era of computing is not about typing. It's not about hand coding. It's about the AI machine learning. And so if the AI machine is doing a lot of your learning, then you wish you have faster machines, larger machines, so you can tackle and solve problems that are bigger and faster. And so I think we're all going to have computing anxiety for a decade. Yeah, that won't go away. And we all have it. Anybody who's in engineering has it.
Your Blackwell chips use dysprosium capacitors. Have you been affected by China's near halt since April 4 on exports of dysprosium and other rare earths? And as part of the Trump administration agreeing to allow you to export H20 chips to China, is there any arrangement either for NVIDIA specifically or more broadly for China to ease its restrictions on these rare earth metal exports?
The first is no, because NVIDIA's use of these capacitors are, of course, some of the most complicated, most advanced capacitors in the world, but the volume we use is not that high in the grand scheme of things. I think the the amount of overall inventory around the world is sufficient for us to enjoy. Your question, do you, as part of the Trump administration allowing you to sell H20 chips to China, is there any broader arrangement for China to ease some of the export controls it has put on those strategic goods going to the United States? Export control as a pillar of national security, and export control